A different kind of graphic organizer that we can use is one for sequencing, right? So sometimes in class at school, teachers want their students to summarize the plot of a story or a novel or whatever, or in upper grades to summarize what happened in a historical context, what happened first, second, third, or sometimes in something like, say, science, describe the sequence of the steps of an experiment or an activity that they did in class. So sequencing comes into play all over the place. This is an example of something that was put together for a student who was in high school where they were doing Romeo and Juliet, right? Because if I have to do it, so should you. And they did a whole bunch of adaptations, right? So they had an adapted book for this student. The student watched the Leonardo DiCaprio version, as did all the other students, right? The teenagers seemed to prefer that over the version that I had to watch. And the other kids, had to write like an essay about Romeo and Juliet and the social political context and blah, 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 which was not appropriate for this student. What we wanted to make sure this student knew were the basics in terms of what happened. So he had a sheet that had a space for the setting, the characters, the plot, the problem and solution, the main things in any kind of story we want an individual paying attention to. So this was his worksheet instead of writing an essay. So the setting, he wrote Italy. Yep, that's where it happened. Who were the characters? So he's got Romeo and Juliet, Romeo's mom and dad, and Juliet's mom and dad, the key characters, right? Stick figures and keywords. Here's the plot. You can tell me if he understands the play. So there's Juliet looking down at a sad Romeo. Here the two of them are with little hearts wanting to get married. Here are the parents saying no. There's Romeo and Juliet. They've got X's for eyes. They're dead. There's the little cup. And there are the parents crying. Did he understand the basic plot of the story? As much as any of us remember, right? Because again, how useful is Romeo and Juliet in our daily adult lives? For most of us, not so much, but we've all been exposed. It's one of those classic stories. So he's got the general. The problem, he said, was that the parents weren't going to allow Romeo and Juliet to get married. What was the solution? Well, their solution was to drink this medicine that they thought would make them sleep, but they died, and by the way, that was a bad idea. Does he get it? Sure. Did he benefit from participating? Absolutely, right? Like, did he get as much as anybody else got out of it? For sure. Did he learn other important things? Yeah, right? He had to pay attention to the story. He learned about other stuff. He had to write stuff. He had to show what he knows, the same kind as all the stuff that the other kids have to do, right? So there are those kinds of things. This is another example. This is the little red hen. Same idea. In this case, though, the student couldn't write. So the student drew and then kind of told as best as she could what was happening, and then we wrote that out for her. But again, knew that it happened at the hen's home and that there was a hen, a cat, a dog, and a duck, and that it involved the hen planting seeds and the seeds growing and the hen chopping the wheat and the hen grinding the wheat and the hen making bread. And that the problem was, and it's really hard to tell in all of this, but here are all the little characters, and it shows the cat and the dog and the duck not putting in the seeds, not growing, not grinding, and so then not being allowed to eat, right? Everything is crossed off for them, and it's like they didn't do this, they didn't do this. The moral of the little red hen story is if you don't help, you don't gain the benefits, right? And then this is an example from a class where they did the rainbow fish as a story. And if you're familiar with the rainbow fish or not familiar with the rainbow fish is a fish, the only fish, with many shiny scales. And all of the plain fish wanted a scale from the rainbow fish, and the rainbow fish would not share. And so then none of the other fish would be his friend, and he was sad about that. And then he decided he should share. That's how the story goes. So again, what was the setting? The setting was the ocean. Who are the characters? The rainbow fish, there was an octopus. The octopus advised the rainbow fish. There's the rainbow fish and other little fish. And the plot, the rainbow fish would not share, was lonely, eventually got to the sharing, and then everybody had shiny scales. And so the problem was, no sharing, no friends, you're lonely. And the solution was, share, you'll have friends, you'll be happy. Right? And again, think about this. I mean, the other students in the class, they were talking at a deeper level about why we should be friendly and why we should share and how this relates to our school code of conduct and blah, 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 right? Like, they were talking at a deeper level, but this was a student with a developmental disability who could just as well participate in the story and get the key concepts and the key bits of information and, right, the important parts. Sharing and being friendly are important, right? This is another example of a sequencing type activity, right? And this is about the turtles in shells hatching, what happens first, second, third. And so for this student, these are images of here's the turtle in the shell, there's the shell cracking, here's the turtle coming out of the shell, and then here's the turtle growing. And so we also had symbolized sentences that described each step. So the student first had to sequence all of the parts and then had to match the right sentence to the right image to describe the process. Right? The other students were doing more sentence writing, right, at a more complex level, but this was a very basic example. And here's another little red hen sequencing. Same idea. There were images from the story, and then there were symbol sentences that went with the images. So the student sequenced all of the images and then had a stack of sentences and had to figure out which sentence goes with which picture. So there's a bit of reading that's involved as well. We're also working on reading, not just sequencing, okay? And then finally, I've got this example also from some of my students that were in my Victoria cohort. They did an activity for the book, The Mitten. The book, The Mitten, is kind of a classic children's book about all of these animals going into a mitten to get warm, and then the mitten explodes, essentially. But there was a particular order in the book, which animal went first, second, third, and so on. And they made this is actually a screen-based activity. They made it in BoardMaker, but it runs, say, through a smart board. So students could do it as a whole class activity, and the teacher can do it with the class, and students come up and choose the first animal and drag it into the mitten. And so they made this as a whole class activity, and then you can also print it, and students can do the individual cut and paste afterwards, right? But just a simple sequencing of what happened first, second, third in the story. And they made this for a kindergarten context, right? So this is like a little kid's book, okay? So that's what we mean when we're talking about sequencing, and it can be for anything, right? So higher level chemistry experiments or high school biology or history classes or children's books, right? Anything that has first, second, third. And finally, we can use graphic organizers for describing things like characters in books, describing settings or geographical locations, or again for conveying information about sort of factual characteristics of historical people, figures, animals, plants, those kinds of things. So here are some examples of that. This again is the rainbow fish. So the rainbow fish story, and I told you what it's about, and finally at the end the rainbow fish learned to share his beautiful scales. The teacher did 2 of these character maps. The teacher read half the book up to the point where the rainbow fish was not sharing and none of the other fish would be his friend, and they did a character map for the rainbow fish at that point when the rainbow fish had no friends. This is the character map that they did after she read the rest of the story. That's why there's a number 2 here. Because at the end of the story, when the rainbow fish learned about the importance of sharing, right, the rainbow fish, in terms of feelings, was happy and excited because he had lots of friends. His personality, he was nice and friendly, right? He was sharing his scales. His appearance, he was still colorful, beautiful, and shiny, even though he gave away some of his shiny scales. And his behavior was sharing and playing. And after they did this, they took the two character maps, the one before the rainbow fish shared, the one after the rainbow fish shared, and they talked about what was the same and different about the fish. And the thing that was the same was the appearance. And they talked about how it's not about appearance, it's about your personality, your behavior, your feelings. See, these are the things that change, and your behavior is what's important. By sharing with your friends, you're happier, you have friends, they think that you're nice and friendly, you look exactly the same as you looked before, right? Same teacher did the thing for the Grinch, how the Grinch stole Christmas, and did a character map for the Grinch up to stealing all the toys, and then after returning all the toys, and then again did a comparison. The Grinch still looked like the Grinch in the end, but because the Grinch was sharing and being nice and friendly, the Grinch had all these friends and all these good things that happened, right? And it wasn't about that he had green fur and all of that, right? So again, we can get into some kind of deeper concepts that way. Okay, so those are describing kinds of things. I've had students do, this is for the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk. So again, same kinds of things, cutting out symbols and sequencing them where they belong. And again, we can make this errorless. If I've got a student who isn't able to discriminate everything, we can just give them the symbols that belong. And maybe they're just working on figuring out which is a feeling versus a behavior, for example. Other students might be able to have a variety of characteristics, some that are related to the character, some that are incorrect, and sort things out. Okay, so that's the giant, and this is Wilbur from Charlotte's Web, right? Same set of things, appearance, actions, personality, feelings, but for Wilbur the pig, okay? So graphic organizers can be a great way of helping individuals understand information and also convey what they've learned about whatever the topic is.